The title of this evening's Dharma talk is Wisdom Has No Owner. Wisdom, which is in Tibetan is yeshe, in Sanskrit is, I think it's jhana, shnana. Prajna is insight, prajna. So, how is that? I should say more. So the idea of not having an owner just is basically saying that you can't become wise, you can't gain wisdom. It tends to look like that initially when we first start the provisional teachings, the beginning teachings. We start out not wanting to be unwise or crazy or confused, and we want some kind of clarity or understanding. So the path starts out as kind of looking like we can get somewhere, kind of a materialistic orientation when we begin. And as we go along, we need to, you could say give up, but it's almost like we don't really give up reference points. It's like they just become kind of beside the point. And this idea of wisdom, or being very, very clear about the nature of one's own self, one's consciousness, and the nature of the world completely, we call it wisdom. We call it transcendental knowledge, or all the other fancy words, Tathagata Garbha, Dharmata, Buddha nature, and so on. Seems necessary to have a path quality towards getting more clear. So we start out with working with our negativity, wherever our, whatever our problems, issues, challenges, however you want to say it, are. We, as practitioners of the Dharma, we meet those directly. And the best way to meet those directly to begin with is by sitting down, as it's taught here, sit down, face the wall. Sit down, hold still with all the senses open, and just watch the way you keep avoiding your birthright. In other words, turning away from your wisdom, from your inherent clarity. It's like the light is too bright. We can't handle that. The ego mind, the self-centered mind, the narcissistic mind wants control, wants to hang on to objects, things, accomplishments, and for that matter, failures, wants to hang on. Operating through the six sense fields, including the mind, we are always looking, strategizing, looking for some way of getting ahead, some way of not falling behind, some way of not losing. This is sometimes called the 8 worldly dharmas. And just to name a few, just success and failure. Most people, most societies, most cultures, unless there's some kind of emphasis on a spiritual path or a path that deeply understands what it is to be a living being. This isn't confined to Buddhism alone. Could be lots of other ways. Indigenous people in this country had an idea, it seems, of how to live in a sacred world. So the idea of having no owner for your clarity, your wisdom, your insight, your ability to see deeply into the true nature of this. It doesn't show up with some kind of a credential or an accomplishment badge. Getting there. And my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, whose parinirvana or anniversary of his passing was just celebrated, you could say, or observed, might be a better word, last April 4th. His photograph is still on the altar. Said, the path to liberation, to seeing clearly what this is one disappointment after the other until the final disappointment, which is realization itself. So another way of saying that, it's that your reference points, your guardrails, your clarity about the mundane aspect of the path begins to collapse. If you're in the relative world, if you're talking to someone who is steeped in some kind of relative situation of correcting you, making you better, doing something with you as if you were a solid, real, ongoing situation, and that your basic nature was like a machine or mechanical, then you might get treated with that approach. And you might be cured, saved from being crazy or from being confused for a while. But nothing lasts. Nothing lasts in the sense that any kind of relative cure or help or support is because of the nature of impermanence is going to go away. It might be there for 30 years. So the idea of what Trungpa Rinpoche was talking about, not that I chatted with him about it, but it looks like he meant that as you went along, there's going to be less and less feeling of getting somewhere. More and more kind of disappointment. It's that the path to awakening, the path to clarity, the path to enlightenment, to use the classical word, enlightenment. The Sanskrit is anuttara samyak sambodhi, which means complete, unexcelled, nothing further. Anuttara, nothing further than this. There's no further enlightenment than this of the Buddha. That is, the path to that is one failing, one disappointment after another until the final disappointment which is realization itself. And the disappointment part seems to come from having an idea of what this would be like and having it not be that. You can't know if you're wise. If you think you're wise, you are just puffed up. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you are wise. You could ask, is there some kind of proof? Do we know that we're headed in the right direction? Do we have a good teacher? Are we being manipulated or controlled? Is this teaching, does it have some kind of basic validity to it? So if it's about disappointment, how can that show up as something that you would want to continue to do? It's a good question that I just asked. Anybody want to answer that? What seems to happen is because the grasping, the self-centeredness, the narcissism that arises in most human beings and in society in general, in our culture in general, it even reifies it. Our culture even supports it and keeps it going. Just the whole idea of opinions, the idea that opinions could be somehow supportive of people. What's your opinion about such and such and such? That is just more and more, just a labyrinth of confusion that goes into opinions. Opinions are supports that protect the flimsiness of our belief in an ego or self. Sitting practice of meditation, sitting down, hold still, and hour after hour, day after day, year after year, watch what happens in the mind, in the mind stream. Just observe it. Don't add on to it with your ideas, your opinions, your interpretations. And don't detract with your judgments, your evaluations, your prescriptions for something better. And don't distract yourself or shut down or turn away or go into some other dimension so that it isn't quite so uncomfortable for your awareness. Interesting thing about this, the way I'm saying it here, is you may have to look at a lot of self-deception. You may have to look at the self-deception without repairing it or fixing it or diluting it or toning it down. Just look at it. It's so very simple that it is highly challenging because it looks like something needs to be done. You need to do something. We've all said this to somebody or had it said to us, well, you can't just sit there. Yeah, you can. And from this point of view, you should. Before this body-mind that is in this room that you call me, before this collapses and goes back into the 5 elements. Are there 5?
Depends on who you ask, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking you.
I don't know.
Good answer. There's 5. We'll go with that. So, in other words, earth, air, fire, wind. What's that other one? Smoke? Before that, your whole sensorium, your whole life, body, speech, mind, all of that before it collapses and goes back into where it came from, or possibly goes into the mouth of a tiger. Who knows what will happen? But it won't last. And it's not like it's nihilistic or negative. It's just true. We just need to be aware that is happening. And so what's being recommended here is train your mind and find out who you are, what this is. And how do we do that? Again, as I've said 1,500 times, you have to look at the negativity. If when negativity arises, you do anything with it, you just postpone, you just might as well be just laminating over your wisdom mind. You just postpone the time. You just continue to go in circles until possibly somebody will come along and kick you. Or maybe they won't kick you. Maybe they'll just say, where are you headed? And you'll say, I'm going that way. But what they're seeing is this. You think it's a straight line. The very nature of confusion is to think that circles are straight lines. I can keep talking, or you could ask a question.
When you're meditating, how do you stop yourself from getting swept away with the current of your thoughts if you're not inputting or detracting from them?
Good question. So how do you stop yourself? To start, you don't stop yourself. The only job, again, from this point of view, there's other ways of teaching meditation, probably hundreds of them. But the way it looks here is that your only job is hold still, as still as possible, without being rigid, and watch that torrent of energy wanting to go away, wanting something else, daydreaming, going this way, going that way. Just observe it. Do nothing with it. Do not meddle with your confusion. Respect your confusion. If you meddle with your confusion, it just creates more current and more snakes in the grass. It's just unending. You just constantly are doing this, and it can get really, really painful. So don't do it. And at the same time, don't cover it up. It's basically, in Buddhism, it's called the 3 poisons. Cover up is ignorance. explaining or justifying or blaming this, blaming that. Any kind of elaboration on it is passion, attachment, clinging. And the other one, of course, is just out and out going to war with something and trying to chop it to pieces or choke it, bite its head off. So just looking at it, it's just like sitting on a train. You're just looking out the window. Everything that goes past in the window is interesting, confusing, changing, and it's none of your business. Treat your thought patterns the same way. You don't have to constantly lecture yourself, but if you just hold your body still and watch what is happening, then the awareness, your actual wisdom mind is watching that. You don't have to create a wisdom mind. More?
Yes, but I don't know how to phrase it, so I will
give it a shot.
I guess it would be when you're in that torrent of thought. How do you observe without being? I guess it's kind of feels like drowning.
Drowning.
When you're in those thoughts, and you get to that point where your thoughts overwhelm to the point where you can't even observe. It feels like.
Well, if it's horrible, then get up and go make a sandwich.
Okay.
You know, I mean, we're not trying to torture ourselves. On the other hand, stay there as long as you can, within reason, and hold the body still so you can see the texture of the torrents, the texture of the drowning, so you can actually watch the drowning. It's always about awareness. The very word Buddhism is awakened, the awakening, or Buddha nature, or the Buddha, the awakened one. What did the Buddha awake to? Nothing is separate. Dependent origination. That even though they're separate beings here, that fundamentally we're separated, but fundamentally we're not separate. And that, when we see that we're not separate, that starts to become your, if you want to call it a reference point. It's not. Somewhat. Eventually, even that one is a relative truth or half-truth. Even that. It's just to help us along. It's like looking at a map. It's like looking at a recipe. Like looking at a menu. You can't eat a menu, you'll starve to death. Unless it's made of cabbage. Hard to find those. More?
No, thank you.
You? Questions? Sir?
What is it that observes self-deception?
So we look for some kind of a reference point of what is it. Then it's the actual questioner that's saying what is it. That's what's looking at it. It's a hair's breadth deviation. If you deviate at all from what's right in front of any of the sense fields, then you go into delusion. Don't move. And if things are moving, then just observe. Don't be seduced by movement. Don't be seduced by stillness. Don't believe, don't disbelieve, don't look away. Yes, sir.
Is asking that question, or that arises, the questioner, is that also self-deception?
Not exactly. Somewhat. But not exactly. There's some kind of something moving around in that area that's more like looking at it. It's more like observing it and less like adding to the confusion. But we need to ask questions. And of course the response is going to be in a relative way, because it's just the way language works. In Buddhism, it's the fourth skandha, or concept, is operating with the other skandhas: form, feeling, perception, concept, and then consciousness of the six sense fields and their objects are all coming together to form what? Me and my world, my stuff, what I like, what I don't like, who's really nice, who sucks. You know, I mean, we're just full of all of these paradigms for everything that's out there. So it's a matter of, over time, slowly training ourselves to just, as it says in the vows, be with all things. Like this banner or this scroll behind me here says, as it is. Whatever it is, that's it. Looking for reality, looking for the truth, looking for happiness, it's right in front of you. It may not be the kind of happiness that is relative, that is opposed to torture. It's not a relative situation. It's fundamental. Excuse me. It is not a feeling. Someone who is clear, someone who understands what this is not concerned whether they have negative or positive and neutral feelings. They're just observing them. So if positive feelings arise, great. Negative feelings arise, great. They don't even say great. It's just a way of talking about it. Not affected by emotions or thoughts. They don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, and don't look away. Not separate, yes. Juju.
What is fundamental happiness?
The different ways of saying it. One of them would be dispassion. And this doesn't mean that you don't have emotions or feelings, but you don't add anything on to what's occurring. So, and you no longer see that yourself as being separate from anything. And it's not a thought about it. It's actually that. All the things that are separated, life, death, happiness, sadness, rich, poor, mice, cats, didn't think about that one, did you? Are not separate. They get their meaning from their opposite. They actually, if you look at one thing, there's something else running around contradicting that, going the other way. It's the way the structure of physical universe is set up. Look at the atom. When's the last time you looked at an atom? Okay. Polarity, just the polarity aspect of it. The polarities just collapse. And at the same time they collapse, nothing has happened because it was always that way. It was always, as it says in the Dzogchen teachings, the great perfection. Nothing needs to be repaired. Nothing needs to be fixed. In the midst of the dissatisfaction, there is satisfaction. Michael?
Is what arises in awareness itself?
Before you said it, it was. But then you went and messed it all up. Yes, not separate. It's separated. Everything is separating. It's quite a sideshow. It's quite a as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage. That kind of, yes.
What about speaking about it negates it?
It doesn't negate it if you don't believe it. You don't believe it, you don't disbelieve it. If I believed or if I disbelieved or believed my thoughts, I could not do this. I mean, when I say do this, I mean sit up here and make a fool of myself. Like I talked about earlier. Who did I? Yeah, it's that fool right there. I couldn't do this. And what am I saying? I'm saying, not that what I'm saying doesn't carry some understanding, but there's no follow-up to it. There's nothing behind it. There's no backup. I have to excuse my clearing my throat because I know William has to get on there and find a way to erase that. Yes.
Shane from California has a question.
Shane.
He asks, are we always returning to the 5 elements?
Is he speaking about death?
Well, you said earlier that we're made of the 5 elements.
Yes. Yeah, the body is returning. This body is made of food, which is made of fire, earth, water. So this is maintained through eating other living things. And so what we think we are is going down. It arose and we've identified with it and then it will go down. But who we actually are isn't going anywhere. Pardon me.
another question. Up in Muskegon, we've got with Jim Johnson, Tammy, Amber, Eric are all watching tonight. And the question, could you please discuss if looking for the truth and grasping for the truth are different? Can awakening happen without intention?
Yes, that's always the way it happens.
There's a question on YouTube from Shane in Grand Rapids.
Okay.
What is the Buddha's view on the sacred nature of the world? Does it compare with indigenous people's view?
I don't know. I haven't checked with the Buddha, so I don't know what he would think. But it's just that the polarity has gone out of this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. Or this should be supported, this other should be taken apart. And it's not that something negative shouldn't be dealt with as it is, but to add on the right and wrong ahead of time, to have some kind of a preset idea of what to object to and what to agree with, like a philosophy or something, or that it's not that that can't work in some way, in a beneficial way to some extent, but we have to be concerned about grasping onto anything and locking down and being fixated on then it starts to turn into what's conventionally called fundamentalism.
I didn't hear if you answered the first part of the question. Could you, is looking for the truth and grasping for the truth different?
So looking or having some curiosity, wanting to find out what this is, wanting to understand this, is more of an I don't know feeling. It's like looking into a woods, into a forest, to use a strong metaphor of not knowing. Excuse me. You might be able to guess what's in there. You might see some eyes looking back out at you, and you might impute or guess or imagine what that is. It might be a tiger, it might be a deer, it might be a painting of eyes on a tree. What was the rest of the question?
Just the comparison of looking for the truth and grasping for the truth. Are they different?
So the grasping, the looking is just the curiosity part, just receiving what give everything your attention, and then whatever shows up, receive it. This doesn't mean that if it is a tiger and comes running after you, that you should just receive. You should climb a tree. Or what else can you do with tigers? I mean, you might say your prayers. Or turn into a tiger yourself. The grasping part seems to be finding something that is a pretty tasty, like a cupcake. Pretty tasty. It's like that. It's not a cupcake, of course, but it's like finding something that we really want and locking down at. It's almost like saying, this'll do. This'll work. I'll use this. This is how I'm gonna look at emptiness. This is how I'm going to look at the teachings of the Buddha. This is how I'm going to look at the way Buddhism teaches this or teaches that. In ancient times, when the Buddha passed, I think there was between 18 and 20 schools that after he passed, he didn't set up things in such a way, and sometimes I think it was deliberate. I think he did have a sense of humor. And he just went into his into the Tushita heaven or wherever he went, and all the schools were all disagreeing, and it got worse. I think the first council, that there was 3 councils, I think, in the first council there was some argument, and then I think the second council, then a lot of lay practitioners. At first it was just monks, and then a lot of lay practitioners got involved, and it just got really challenging, like a lot of different baseball teams.
A question from Don from Virginia. He asks, if I sit with disappointment and observe, is this a form of surrender?
It was before you called it that. So you can actually work with what you're doing without, because here's what happens: as soon as whatever's happening, as soon as you name it, especially if you name it with some kind of a motive to lock down or control something, then we've sealed it off, and then whatever's happening on the other side may still be on the move, but instead we're fine because we're looking at our idea of what that was. Even the things you lock down on, like in our tradition, if you receive vows, if you ask and are allowed to receive precepts, those as soon as you do that, they immediately start changing. I'm pretty sure there isn't a person in here who is fully ordained or lay ordained that hasn't had the experience of their understanding of the vow being totally different than it was before they began to do that. Michelle?
So, does our perceived letting go, is that actually kind of this false sense of control?
Is it what?
A false sense of control? We say, oh, we're going to let go of something?
So I don't usually, it's not that you couldn't, I'm just going to let that go. It's not that you couldn't do it a little bit like that, but I usually don't say, just let it go. I usually say, look at it. Don't throw away the very, in our metaphor we use as a dharma gate. A dharma means truth, and gate means something that you may need to go through. So that difficulty is coming up, instead of letting it go, let's just really look at it first and see the way we hang on. So that you actually see the way the claws of your mind are wrapped around that. Because if you actually see how you're hanging on deeply, if you really see it deeply, there isn't any hanging on. You've already let go. Seeing confusion completely. You can't see 92% of it. Seeing confusion completely is awakening. The Buddha himself did not awaken to awakening. He awoke to the nature of confusion. But don't take my word for it. Yes.
You earlier brought up the teaching of Dzogchen, the great perfection. I'm wondering, is our need to have to realize that something that needs to change?
I'm not sure if I'm to realize that everything is perfect.
It's, that's the part, to me, it seems like there's still something that needs to be done, that we still need to realize that. So I'm wondering how that fits with the teaching of perfection, the great perfection.
Well, it's already perfect, and you don't think so. I mean, simply put. And to one who understands this deeply, and this is a secret teaching, so don't tell anybody. Okay? It's neither perfect nor is it imperfect. But you have to teach it somehow. So we'll start with the part that you think is not true. The whole idea of something being perfect or not perfect is extra. We just use the perfection so that when you see what this is, there isn't anything else but this. There is no wrong. There is no imperfect. It's the great perfection. To realize who you are, it's not that you have some kind of a coming out party. And finally, the Buddha. That was hard. I don't recommend it. You just have a complete, thorough seeing, witnessing of it, and you're no longer confused. This doesn't mean you're not confused about where you stored the coffee creamer. Doesn't mean that you don't. What did I do with that? Or look at a car and forget how to start it. You guys don't have that. You're all young. But eventually it's going to happen. You're going to look at that and say, I think that's the key. Prius doesn't have a key. That's why we got one. You don't have to turn the key. Eventually you just tell it where to go and it'll drive itself. Further questions? Roberto.
Hi. You mentioned transcendental wisdom.
Yes.
What's the relationship with that and ultimate truth?
So transcendental means going beyond. So wisdom, so it's just another way of talking about it. Ultimate truth, just another word. Some, if you have 10 words, sometimes you'll be drawn more to one set of words that seems to be point. The one I always use is not separate because there's no Sanskrit pronunciation of it. It's just not. It's very simple because it sure the hell looks like everything is separated. That's the big thing that we keep. Keep reinforcing our confusion by looking at how separate everything is. How do I know? You heard me say this so many times. I do it all the time. I'm doing it now. You don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to be some idea of somebody who's not confused. Just see the confusion. If you see the confusion, the warfare is over. The war might have not gone anywhere. But there's just no one is at war anymore. So the warfare may be there, may not. You're not concerned. You're not concerned whether you have thoughts. Someone who, the manifestation of wisdom could show up as what's talked about in the tantric tradition as crazy wisdom. And the reason they say that is sometimes those who are realized tend to act in odd ways. I'm not justifying anything. I'm not trying to say that it's okay. I don't mean that. I'm probably one of the few people who you could ask about that would say, I'm not sure. I thought that was funny. Further question? Yes.
What's the difference? You brought up the two terms earlier, prajna and jnana. I'm wondering what those are differently.
So, jnana is jnan means to know, and prajnan or prajna is taking the word jnana and adding something onto it. Jnana is just wisdom, and prajna or like prajna paramita is the wisdom that has gone beyond. So it's more on the level of, it has more of a relative insight, seeing something. Prajna paramita, the sword of Manjushri is the sword of prajna, double-edged sword. It cuts through self and other. So duality is cut through, the belief in duality. Just another metaphor for seeing what is true.
Thank you.
It's kind of your question that you asked yourself earlier, but how do you tell if you're on the right path or how do you motivate yourself when it doesn't seem like you're getting anywhere?
So there are several ways of doing that, and one of the ways of doing that is to set set an intention, like we talked about earlier. Set some kind of intention so that you're actually doing something with the path. I know that's not a complete answer. Is there some aspect of that you want to go into?
Sure. Why would you set the intention if it looks like the practice is unfruitful?
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good way of saying it. The practice is unfruitful. Maybe the understanding of what the actual fruit is involved with what the basis is and what the path is. So when you feel like something is unfruitful, you need to go back and look at what the inspiration was to do this in the first place. Return to your original inspiration to even step on this path. And look at that, what that is. and then look at the path quality of what is happening, what's been happening to you personally. And then look at the desire or the imagination that arises around some kind of expectation of what should be happening, rather than what is actually occurring, which may feel like losing or loss or no fruit, or not. Maybe it's not the kind of fruit you were looking for or expected. So returning to the original first step, be a good idea. Why receive vows, or why begin meditation? It seems to be necessary. The three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, teaching person, what is being taught, and the community of people who are together, seems to be a really powerful vehicle for addressing all different parts of that kind of doubts or feeling of not getting anywhere and so on. It's not going to solve it. Each person is going to have to do it themselves. It takes a lot of work to do this, and it's not materially, it's not particularly fruitful.
If we don't really realize what we're getting into when we first step onto the path, then what is it about that original inspiration that is important to come back to?
I follow what you're saying. I think there's some point, there's some kind of inspiration that brought that about. Going to be different with everyone. There could be some stories around it, but there's some kind of fundamental connection that you have. It's there. Now, if it weren't there, you couldn't keep doing this. I mean, you would do something else. You know, you would leave. You would do something else. Go ahead.
Just wondering if that inspiration changes as we go along.
Yes, it could vanish.
How do we return to it if it's vanished?
We can always return to something. If something hasn't vanished, you don't need to return to, because it's there. Not separate. Like returning to a dream. A dream is not there. It's vanished, but you can return to it. Are those metaphors reaching you?
I think so.
That's not a bad answer. I guess so. Good question. Sir?
Could you say that the inspiration for the path, to follow the path, isn't so much a desire as it is your inner wisdom coming out, I guess? Does that make any sense at all?
It could function that way.
So I guess instead of having to find that motivation, because you shouldn't grasp at things, you're more of looking for, by the absence of desire, you find your way back to the path.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay.
Can you paraphrase what you said? I might agree with your paraphrase.
The lack of passion and desire is the path, and so you can't lose the path if you, I guess I can't really paraphrase it. I'll think about it.
You have a degree?
I do.
What's it in?
Psychology.
That's what I thought. Yeah, contemplate that for a while. So I'm not dissing your question, or you know, don't mean to mock you or anything. That's not it at all. Just the way you work with that information. Contemplate that. Ask me again.
Yes, sir.
In exactly 15 days. Further questions? Joseph, do you have any?
Questions. It was different coming down here on, I was listening to YouTube on the way here. So that it's very different hearing you and then stepping into the social environment.
Uh-huh.
And the form feels very different than just listening.
Interesting. Yeah. Wonder why.
That's what I was gonna ask you, why is there a difference?
Blink, blink, blink. I don't know. I mean, I could speculate, but everybody's already doing that. Add to the speculation. Did you?
There is another question from Shane in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, Shane.
Is naming whatever thoughts arise thinking, or perhaps saying just observe, appropriate?
So that's a particular to, when thoughts arise, to a technique called shine, or shamatha, or mindfulness, to when thoughts arise. This is something that Trungpa Rinpoche taught. Not right away, he'd been here a few years before he began to teach that. So you're sitting and thoughts arise and you ladle thinking and return to your breath. He said return to your out breath. So it's a way of kind of retraining yourself to kind of create kind of a mindful person. And my way of understanding that is maybe better to just watch what's happening rather than try to create some kind of a mindful guy or girl, somebody who's mindful. Better to really relate directly right where it's at. So when thoughts arise, just observe. Thoughts go away, just observe. And watch the way we add ideas and comments to whatever's arising and going away. It's always about observing, it's always about awareness. It is not about a gaining idea of creating some kind of mindfulness or very, very mindful person. This is a lot of what's happening in the mindfulness community with people like, I'm not criticizing anybody, they're serving people that need that kind of help. They certainly have to listen to me, like John Kabat-Zinn or other people who are in that psychological area. So, you could do that. You could do. My teaching is just watch what moves. So, if you want to sit there and watch your thoughts, watch your breath come and go for an hour, go ahead. It's just it's the fixating part of the grasping and trying to get a credential. When you go out of here, I stayed on my breath the whole hour. It's not helpful to do that. It creates an artifice. So it's better to be not better. Is that word? Better to be not better? Yes. The two betters. Better and not better. Yes.
That's disappointing.
I know. How do you think I feel?
How can we handle that disappointment? There's so much emphasis on getting better, fixing this broken person or whatever.
So the way I talk about this, and you've heard me many times, is I'm not saying there can't be some improvement or some less struggle and warfare. Of course, it's the way we approach it that is difficult. We actually buy into the warfare by thinking we can stop this and correct that and smooth this out and tamp that down. We try to do it through some kind of materialism, and we're spiritual beings. We've been downloaded into a physical situation, very low vibration. That's why everything looks so damn real. But it's just it's a really low frequency dream. This is why we say, wake up. And how do you do that? You have to see the way in which you're asleep. And how do you do that? You look at the way that you keep believing in this and not believing in that. And you just watch the confusion. We create it. As it says in, the Book of Miracles, the best line in the whole book. And I read the whole book, so I can't, not in a position to make that statement. But what is real, what is authentic, is not threatened ever. Who you actually are, your fundamental reality, is not threatened by death, by life, not threatened by anything. All of that is just made up. Shannon.
I'm thinking about grasping and how we don't just grasp things that we want, but we grasp at things that are very painful, that we don't want.
True.
And it's kind of like almost seems like kind of a compulsion sometimes. Yes. Do you think maybe one way of working with that or starting to sort of break that up is having a sense of humor around that when that starts to happen?
Yes, I do think it's good to have a sense of humor, but it isn't, you can't create a sense of humor to apply to it. You can't go over here, get a sense of humor, come back and kind of push the sense of humor into the, what's it called, seriosity? No. But you can't push it in there. But what you can do, a sense of humor is just open space with a bunch of language around it, where the words are bumping into each other. That's why someone who's a comedian, they'll set you up so that you buy into one thing, and then they'll pull the rug out from under you, and then you fall over, and it's funny. That's all. It's just a way of structuring space. So my understanding is it seems to be necessary to look at the clinging that is wanting something, and the clinging that is clinging to something that you don't want, because it gives you a sense of at least I'm here, at least I know what I am, at least I am somebody. So it's the fear of non-existing. We try to trade that off. I'll take the suffering as long as just I don't want that fear of open space or that fear of falling. The fear of falling is a strong one, and it's been said before that in the realization, to use that metaphor for realization in Buddhism, is, and maybe in other ways, is that yes, you are falling, you are going to fall, but you never hit bottom because there isn't one. So that eventually you just get used to falling and the fear dissipates.
It's amazing to think about how the ego thinks that that is worth it. You know what I mean?
That's
it's
how
like, I'm just gonna like crank up,
Yes.
you know, this intense suffering, because then, you know, it's real. Or,
Control.
yeah.
It's just control.
Mm-hmm.
So and you can't, if I were to say to somebody, well, just let go, which people often do, that's really disrespectful to the nature of confusion. You have to be very careful if you're going to help somebody, which of course you're in the helping tradition. If you're going to help somebody, you have to really respect their confusion. It's unless you're really clear about who's in front of you, whether you're a professional or not. Just listen, just receive, give no advice. Make them drag it out of you. What do you think I should do? I don't know. What are you doing now? Well, you know what I'm doing. I'm torturing myself, making myself miserable, running in circles, fighting with my spouse. You're not doing that, are you?
I don't think no.
You tried fighting with Sunshu? Have you tried fighting with her?
Yeah, I always win when I fight with her.
Yeah. It's a one-sided battle.
Yeah, she's very
Nice.
she's very nice. I could laugh about that for a long time. I think of all the times I've talked with Setshu. Where is she? She being a mama?
Yeah.
Yes, she's up there with fighting with Rumi. So we're at the end of our this. Thank you so much.
So we'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books. I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes we have in the hallway. We rely and are greatly appreciative of any financial support you can help us with. We also welcome any of those of you who would like to have a monthly subscription. Donating Sokukoji via PayPal, that works for many people, and we would appreciate it if you might consider that.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiro san shi shifu shison musa moko sa directions, the three worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.